The battlefield was silent. The air was heavy with the smell of rust and dust. Shattered weapons lay scattered on the ground like broken bones. The earth itself seemed to remember the screams of war. No birds sang here, no wind moved freely. It was a place where time had stopped. Lena walked slowly across the ruins. She was young, curious, and full of questions. Her boots crunched against the gravel and ash. Every step reminded her that this was not an ordinary place. She had traveled far just to see this land, a battlefield that had been forgotten by most of the world. She bent down to touch the dirt. It was dark and dry, almost black in color. This soil had drunk the blood of thousands long ago. She felt a strange chill run through her body, as if the ground was whispering secrets, but she could not understand them. Her torchlight fell upon a broken shield. The metal was cracked, but still carried marks of a great army. Nearby, a sword lay rusted yet sharp enough to cut if held. She lifted the sword for a moment. It felt heavy, like it did not want to leave the ground. With effort, she placed it back where it rested. Her heart beat faster with every discovery. The battlefield stretched wide in all directions. Old trenches cut across the land like scars. Shattered helmets, broken banners, and burned armor pieces were everywhere. This was more than history. It was a graveyard where time itself refused to heal. Yet Lena's eyes were drawn toward one place, a small mound near the edge of a ruined bunker. She stepped carefully toward it. Her light flickered as if fighting the darkness. Something shiny caught her attention. It was half buried in the dirt. She bent down and brushed away the dust with her fingers. A helmet emerged, old yet strangely intact. Its surface was dark, covered in scratches, but its shape was strong and proud. It did not belong to an ordinary soldier. The moment her hand touched the helmet, she froze. A sound echoed in her mind. It was not a sound she heard with her ears, but deep inside her thoughts. A whisper, faint yet clear. The voice said, "Find me, I'm still alive." Her eyes widened. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked around, but no one was there. She dropped the helmet quickly. Her heart was racing. Had she imagined it? The battlefield was silent again. Only the crunch of her boots and the echo of her own fear remained. Yet something inside her told her this was not her imagination. Gathering her courage, Lena picked up the helmet again. It felt warmer than before. The metal pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat. She held it close. The whisper returned, softer this time. "Do not leave me here. Find me." Her skin prickled with goosebumps. She wanted to run away, but she also wanted to know the truth. The helmet was heavy, heavier than it looked. As she carried it back toward her camp, she felt the weight was not only in her hands, but in her mind. It was as if the helmet carried a soul, a memory, a life that refused to end. She sat by her campfire later that night. The flames danced while the helmet rested beside her. She stared at it, unable to look away. Her thoughts spun in circles. Who was the voice? Was it a ghost? Was it a soldier left behind? Or something else entirely? Her notebook lay open. She wrote down every detail. The battlefield, the broken weapons, the helmet, the whisper. The words filled the page, but gave her no comfort. Instead, they deepened the mystery. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the whisper came again, stronger than before. I wait. I'm still alive." Lena gasped and looked around. The night was quiet. The fire crackled softly. No one else was there, yet the voice seemed closer now. It was as if the helmet itself was alive. She reached out and touched it gently. The warmth spread through her fingers. The whisper turned almost into a sigh, as though the helmet was relieved to be found. Sleep did not come easily to her. She lay awake, listening, waiting, but the voice did not return. Only silence filled the camp. Still, she knew her life had changed forever that day. This was no ordinary artifact. This was a message from the past, a voice carried across 100 years of time. The battlefield was forgotten by the world, but not by the soldier who had once worn that helmet. And now, Lena was the only one who could hear him, the only one who could follow the whisper. Her journey had just begun. The mystery of the helmet would not let her rest. And somewhere deep inside, a soldier was still waiting to be found. The night was long and restless. Lena sat by the dim fire, her eyes fixed on the strange helmet resting beside her. Its surface gleamed faintly in the firelight, as though it held its own secret glow. She had carried artifacts before, broken swords, rusted shields, bones of forgotten warriors. But never had she found something that whispered into her mind. Never had she touched metal that seemed to breathe. She leaned closer. Her hand hovered just above it, her fingers trembling. The moment she touched it again, the whisper returned. Soft, tired but clear. "Do not leave me, please." Lena jerked back, her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes searched the shadows around her. But there was no one else. Only the helmet, glowing faintly as though it had waited centuries for her. She whispered back, almost without thinking, "Who are you?" The voice answered, not with words she spoke, but inside her thoughts. "Eric, Captain Eric." Her heart skipped a beat. The name echoed inside her mind as though carried by a storm across time. She had read that name once in an old history book. A captain who led soldiers during the Great War. A man marked as missing, never found. Could this be him? The helmet pulsed faintly in her hands. Not like a machine, but like a heartbeat. Every beat carried fragments of memory into her mind. She saw flashes of fire and smoke. Men shouting, metal clashing, skies burning with strange light. She saw a soldier standing tall, his armor glowing, his voice calling his men to hold the line. Then silence, darkness, and pain. The vision ended as quickly as it had come, leaving her shaken and breathless. She set the helmet down, but it seemed to pull her back like a magnet. She could not ignore it. "Why me?" she whispered. The voice came again, faint but urgent. "Because you hear me, because you can find me." The next morning, she could not stop thinking about it. She packed her bag, but the helmet went in first. She could not leave it behind. As she walked through the ruins, every step seemed guided by it. The helmet whispered directions, sometimes just feelings. A tug to the left, a pull toward a shadowed trench. It was leading her somewhere, but she did not yet know where. At night, she wrote in her notebook again. Her handwriting was shaky, her words uneven. She wrote, "The helmet speaks, it knows me, it remembers, it says his name is Captain Eric." The more she wrote, the less it felt like madness. The more it felt like destiny. Still, a question burned inside her. If Captain Eric had died 100 years ago, how could his voice still exist? The helmet gave her fragments, dreamlike whispers of his last hours. Ambush, betrayal, light. I fell, but I did not die. Sometimes the words broke into pain-filled cries. Other times they sounded calm, almost hopeful, like he knew she would come one day, one night, as the stars burned bright above. The helmet gave her more than just words. It gave her an image. She saw a chamber of glass and light buried deep underground. Inside it floated a figure, frozen in time. His face was calm, his body untouched by age. The vision lasted only seconds, but she knew what she saw. He was not dead. He was waiting. Her breath shook as she closed her notebook. She realized this was no longer about history. It was about something alive, something trapped between life and death. The whispers were not random. They were a map, and she was chosen to follow it. The helmet rested quietly beside her. The firelight flickered across its scarred surface. For a moment, she almost thought it was smiling at her. And deep inside, the voice whispered again, calm and certain, "You are close, do not stop now." Lena clenched her fists. She was afraid, but she was also drawn deeper into the mystery. Her life as an archaeologist had always been about finding the past. But now the past had found her, and it was alive. The journey was no longer about studying ruins. It was about finding the man who should have been gone a century ago, and the helmet would guide her to him. The city library was cold and quiet. Tall shelves rose like walls of forgotten memory. Dust floated in the pale light, and the air smelled of ink, leather, and time. Lena walked slowly between the rows, her eyes searching, her mind restless. The helmet was hidden in her bag, heavy as a secret. It had whispered all through the night, guiding her here, and now she understood why. If there were answers, they would be written in old records. She found the war section at the far end of the library. Books thick with dust, papers yellowed and brittle. She pulled out volumes one by one, flipping through names of soldiers, dates of battles. Her fingers stopped at a list of officers, and there it was, Captain Eric Vaynar. Beside his name, 2 words, missing in action. Her heart pounded. She traced the letters with her finger. This was the man, the voice in the helmet. A soldier lost 100 years ago, yet somehow still alive. But the records were strange. Some reports claimed he fell in battle. Others said his unit retreated without him. One letter from a soldier mentioned he saw Eric vanish in a burst of light. Another described finding his sword, but no body. The more she read, the more the truth slipped away like smoke. It was as if history itself had been rewritten, and the whispers in her mind seemed to grow louder with every page. She dug deeper. At last, behind a stack of brittle folders, she found a sealed file. Its cover stamped, classified, experimental unit. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside were strange sketches of machines, circular chambers filled with energy coils, notes written in rushed handwriting, phrases like time stasis, human preservation test, and subject, Captain Eric. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Her suspicions were true. This was no normal soldier's disappearance. This was a military experiment hidden under the name of war. The helmet in her bag grew warm. She froze, glancing around the empty hall. No one else was near, yet the whisper came strong and sharp. Yes, you see now. Her heart raced. She pressed the bag closed quickly, afraid someone might hear. But the voice was only for her. No one else would ever believe it. She copied as many notes as she could. Her notebook filled with sketches and lines. Every page drew a clearer picture. Captain Eric had not died. He had been sealed in some kind of stasis field, a prison of time, hidden away beneath the ruins. The whispers had been right. He was waiting, and the helmet was his key. When she left the library, night had fallen again. The streets were dark, the lamps flickering weakly. She felt the helmet pulse inside her bag like a second heartbeat. Why me? She whispered under her breath. The answer came gently. Because you listen. She swallowed hard. She wanted to deny it, but deep inside she knew the truth. Others had passed through the battlefield before. Others had touched the helmet, maybe even heard its faint echo, but none of them had stayed. None of them had answered. Only she had chosen to listen. Her path was no longer her own. The whispers had tied her to a soldier lost in time, and now the truth was unfolding step by step. The hidden records had given her more than history. They had given her a mission. Somewhere in the ruins, beneath stone and ash, a chamber waited. And inside it, a man who had fought and bled for a world that had already forgotten him. She walked into the night, her notebook heavy with secrets, her bag heavier still, the helmet's voice soft but unyielding. Closer now, you are closer. Lena did not know what she would find. She did not know if freeing him would bring salvation or danger. But she knew one thing with certainty. Her life was no longer about studying the past. Her life was about rewriting it. And the soldier's fate, after 100 years, now rested in her hands. The whispers did not let her sleep. All through the night, the voice of Captain Eric called her, sometimes clear, sometimes broken like echoes through water. Beneath the earth, follow the path. I wait. Lena sat awake, staring at the helmet glowing faintly beside her. She knew now there was no turning back. The hidden records had told her enough. He was not dead, he was trapped, and only she could find him. At dawn, she packed her bag again, this time with more than books and notes. She carried food, water, ropes, tools, a small lantern, and of course the helmet itself. The battlefield waited in silence as she returned. Its broken weapons and burned trenches felt less like ruins and more like warnings. She pressed forward. The helmet pulsed warmly, guiding her like a compass. Every step seemed chosen by the whispers. Every direction was marked by a pull in her mind. She reached the bunker she had seen before. Its walls collapsed, its roof half buried in dirt and stone. For years, it had stood as nothing more than wreckage. But now she knew it hid something deeper. She crouched, brushing away the soil. Her fingers found cold metal, a hatch hidden beneath rubble, sealed by rust and time. Her pulse quickened. The whispers came stronger now. Yes, here, open it. It took hours to clear the rocks. Her hands were raw, her arms weak. But determination burned inside her stronger than fatigue. At last, the hatch opened with a scream of rust. A black tunnel stretched downward, air heavy with dust, and the smell of old stone rushed into her lungs. She raised her lantern and stepped inside. The ground trembled faintly, as though the earth itself remembered. The tunnel walls were lined with strange markings. Not only human symbols, but alien shapes carved deep into the stone. Spirals, circles, and jagged lines that seemed to move in the flicker of light. Her heart pounded. This was no ordinary bunker. This was something older, something otherworldly. The Great War had not just been fought between men. There had been another hand in it, something hidden in shadows. She followed the path downward. The air grew colder, heavier. Each step echoed against walls that seemed too wide and too deep for a human structure. Her lantern flickered as if struggling against the darkness. And then she saw them, machines silent and broken, their shapes curved like no human design. Wires and crystals scattered across the floor like shattered glass. She bent close, tracing the strange metal. It pulsed faintly under her fingers as though still alive. The helmet in her bag answered with a soft hum. The connection between the ruins and the artifact was undeniable. Further in, she reached a vast chamber. Its roof arched high, its walls covered in glowing symbols. At the center stood a massive circular structure. It looked like a ring of stone and steel, but it hummed with a strange energy even after a century of silence. The whispers grew louder. Almost. She clutched the helmet tight against her chest. Her knees weak, her breath uneven. She had discovered something no historian had ever dreamed of. A hidden war, a secret prison, a soldier preserved beyond time. Yet with every step forward, fear grew stronger. If this was real, then what else was buried here? If Captain Eric was alive, then who had built this place? And why had they chosen him? The silence of the chamber felt alive, as though eyes watched her from the shadows, as though the walls themselves breathed. She placed the helmet on the ground before the great ring. Instantly the room trembled. Symbols along the walls flared to life, glowing blue and red. The air vibrated with a deep hum. Dust fell from the ceiling as the ancient machinery woke. Her heart thundered in her chest. The helmet glowed so brightly it almost burned to touch. And the voice came, stronger than ever before. "I'm here. Find me. Free me." Lena fell to her knees, overwhelmed. She realized this was no longer just discovery. This was destiny. She had stepped into a war older than herself, a war that had never truly ended. The ruins were not only ruins. They were a cage, and inside that cage, a soldier had waited for 100 years. Now, she stood at the door of his prison, and with every beat of her heart, the whispers urged her closer. The chamber's silence was heavy. It pressed on Lena's chest as if the air itself carried weight. The glowing symbols pulsed across the walls like veins of light, and the circular machine in the center hummed faintly. Waiting, she tightened her grip on the helmet, her hands trembling. This was the place the whispers had led her to. This was the prison that held Captain Eric. Her lantern flickered, casting shadows across the alien machinery. She stepped closer, her boots echoing against the stone floor. The structure looked like a ring, but within it stood a glass-like chamber. Inside floated a man, suspended in a sea of light. His armor gleamed faintly, though it was cracked and scarred from battle. His face was calm, eyes closed as if lost in sleep. There was no decay, no sign of death. It was as though time had been forced to stop around him. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the chamber would hear it. The whispers surged through her mind, clear and strong. "You see me, you found me." She pressed her hand against the glass. It was ice cold, but beneath it she could feel a faint pulse of life. He was real, he was still alive. The helmet in her arms vibrated with energy. She knew now it was not only his voice. It was his lifeline, a key that connected him to the world outside. She studied the machinery around the chamber. There were consoles covered in strange symbols, crystals glowing faintly in sockets, wires stretched like roots into the walls. Much of it was broken, shattered by time, but the main chamber still worked. It held him in a stasis field, preserving him through decades. She remembered the notes she had read in the library. Time stasis, human preservation test. Subject, Captain Eric. This was the experiment. This was the truth history had hidden. But another thought stabbed at her mind. If the chamber preserved him, then what would happen if it was shut down? Would it release him unharmed? Or would it kill him instantly? The helmet seemed to sense her fear. It pulsed warmly in her hands, the voice whispering with calm strength. "Do not be afraid. It is the only way." Lena bit her lip, doubt clawing at her. Her whole life had been about studying history, not changing it. Now she was standing before a man lost for a century, and she alone could decide his fate. Her eyes returned to his face. He looked peaceful, almost serene, but beneath that calm, she felt the weight of battles fought and blood spilled. This was not only a man. This was a soldier who had once carried the hopes of many, and still waited to rise. She lifted the helmet and placed it gently against the glass. Instantly, the chamber roared with light. The symbols on the walls flared so bright she had to shield her eyes. The hum of the machine grew into a deep thunder. The floor shook under her feet. Sparks shot from the consoles, and the voice filled her mind with a single, powerful cry. "Free me." Her heart hammered. She reached for the nearest console, pressing her hand against the glowing crystals. The machine responded, the glass chamber cracking with light. The air screamed with energy. Her lantern went out, leaving only the glow of the ruins. She thought she heard footsteps in the dark, mechanical clicks echoing beyond the chamber walls. But she could not turn back now. Every nerve in her body told her the chamber was waking. Every breath felt like standing on the edge of storm. The figure inside stirred. His fingers twitched, his chest lifted slowly as though drawing his first breath in 100 years. Lena's eyes filled with tears of fear and wonder. The helmet blazed so brightly she could barely hold it. Her hands burned, but she refused to let go. This was the moment the whispers had led her to. This was the threshold between death and life. The ground shook harder, dust falling from the ceiling. The alien symbols pulsed faster. And behind her, in the shadows of the ruins, shapes began to move. Guardians, silent for a century, were waking with their prisoner. The prison was never meant to be opened, and now that she had touched its key, its protectors stirred from their slumber. Lena gasped as the chamber cracked open with a hiss of light. The air exploded outward like a wave, and the voice came not as a whisper, but as a shout. "I am free." The soldier's eyes snapped open, glowing faintly as they met hers. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. And in that silence, Lena realized the truth. She had not just freed a man. She had awoken a storm that the earth itself had tried to bury. The hiss of the chamber echoed through the ruins. Light poured out in waves, filling every corner of the underground hall. Lena shielded her eyes, her heart racing faster than ever before. When the glare faded, she saw him, Captain Eric, no longer frozen, no longer silent. His chest rose and fell with steady breath, his eyes wide open, glowing faintly in the dim light. For 100 years he had been trapped in silence, and now he breathed again. Lena's hands shook as she clutched the helmet close. Eric turned his head slowly, his gaze falling on her. For a moment he said nothing, as if the weight of a century pressed against his voice. Then the whisper that had haunted her mind became a voice in the air, strong and real. "You found me," he said, his voice low but steady. Lena's throat tightened. She could only nod. She wanted to speak, but words escaped her. She had freed a man who belonged to another time. The ground trembled beneath them. The alien machinery groaned like a beast waking from sleep. Symbols along the walls flared red, pulsing faster and faster. Lena's skin prickled with fear. Eric's eyes sharpened, his soldier's instinct immediately alive. "They know," he whispered, his hand clenching into a fist. "They will come." And then she heard it, the sound she had feared earlier. Metallic footsteps, echoing clicks from the shadows. Figures moved in the darkness, tall, inhuman, their bodies made of steel and crystal. Their eyes glowed with cold fire as they emerged into the chamber. Guardians, silent protectors of the prison. They had waited 100 years for this moment, and now they would not allow their prisoner to leave. Lena stumbled back, fear clawing at her chest. She had uncovered history, but history had teeth. Eric stepped forward, though his legs shook with weakness. A century in stasis had drained his strength, yet his spirit blazed like fire. He looked at the helmet in her arms and nodded. "Give it to me," he said, his voice commanding. She hesitated, her arms tightening around it. But the voice in her head, the one that had guided her all this way, spoke once more. "Trust me." With trembling hands, she placed the helmet into his grasp. The moment it touched him, light surged across his body. The armor he wore glowed faintly, cracks sealing, energy flowing through him like blood. Eric stood taller, his eyes burning with renewed strength. The Guardians hissed in unison, their weapons sparking to life. But Eric was no longer a prisoner. He was a soldier reborn. The first Guardian lunged, its blade arms slashing through the air. Eric moved with sudden speed, catching the strike with his forearm. The clash echoed like thunder, sparks flying between man and machine. He twisted, driving his fist into the Guardian's chest. Metal shattered, light burst, and the machine collapsed in ruins. Lena gasped, her fear mixing with awe. This was not only survival. This was war reborn. But more Guardians advanced. 3, then 5, their glowing eyes locking onto the awakened soldier. The chamber shook as their heavy steps closed in. Lena backed away toward the wall, clutching her notebook like a shield. She was no warrior. She had no weapon. Yet she could not leave him. He had waited 100 years, and now he fought not only for himself, but for the world that had forgotten him. Eric fought with fury, every move precise. His fists and strikes carried the weight of training long ago. The helmet glowed brighter with every clash, feeding him strength. Still, he was outnumbered. Each Guardian fought without fear, without hesitation. Their blades slashed, their bodies crashed into him. And though he stood strong, Lena saw the strain in his face. He was human, and his time of rest had weakened him. She looked around desperately, her eyes falling on a broken console sparking against the wall. The alien symbols burned across its surface. If the chamber was still alive, perhaps she could use it. Her mind screamed at her that she was no soldier. But she was an archaeologist, and she knew how to read patterns. She rushed forward, ignoring the fear clawing at her stomach. Her fingers pressed against the glowing lines. And the chamber roared again, light surging outward. One of the Guardians froze mid-step, its body shaking violently before collapsing in sparks. Eric glanced at her, a brief smile flickering across his face. "You learned fast," he shouted, before driving his fist through another machine. Lena's heart pounded. She had never imagined she would fight in a war older than her. Yet here she was, standing beside a man who had been lost a century ago. Together, they pushed back the Guardians, man and machine against the machines of a forgotten war. The battle raged in light and thunder. The ruins shook with every strike, dust raining from the ceiling. One by one, the Guardians fell, until only silence remained. Eric stood tall, his chest heaving with heavy breaths. The helmet glowed faintly, dimming as if satisfied. He turned to Lena, his eyes burning with determination. "The prison is broken," he said, his voice low, "but the war is not over." The chamber lay in ruins. Smoke and sparks drifted through the air. Broken Guardian machines lay scattered across the floor like shattered statues. Their glowing eyes dimmed, their weapons silent. Lena leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling. Her hands shook from exhaustion, her clothes covered in dust. She could hardly believe she was still alive. Captain Eric stood at the center, the helmet gleaming faintly in the dim light. His armor cracked but glowing with threads of energy. He looked like a man pulled from legend, a soldier who had refused death itself. Yet his eyes were not filled with triumph. They were heavy with memory. 100 years of silence weighed behind his gaze. He turned to her, his voice steady but low. "You freed me, but now the world must choose what it will do with me." Lena swallowed hard. She had dreamed of uncovering lost history, but never had she thought she would stand beside it, living and breathing. "You don't belong to the past anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're part of now." Eric shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "No, I'm still part of the war, and the war is not finished." The walls around them pulsed with faint light, symbols shifting and fading like dying stars. The prison had fallen, but deeper machinery still hummed within the earth. The Guardians were not the end, only the first line of defense. Eric's voice grew firm. "They built this place to keep me hidden, but not only me, there are others, other prisons, other soldiers who never came home." Lena's heart clenched. The thought of more men trapped in endless silence sent a shiver down her spine. If this was true, then history was more broken than she had ever known. She stepped closer, her eyes locked with his. "What do we do now?" she asked softly. Eric looked at her, the glow of his helmet reflecting in his eyes. "We fight," he said simply, "not only to survive, but to remind the world what humanity is, that we do not abandon our own, not even across time." For a moment, silence filled the chamber again, but it was no longer heavy or suffocating. It was the silence before dawn, the silence before a new chapter. Lena felt her fear begin to melt, replaced by something stronger. She realized this was bigger than discovery, bigger than history. This was about choice. She could walk away, close her notebook, pretend the ruins had given her nothing, or she could stand beside the man who had waited a century to rise again. Her voice was quiet but steady when she answered, "Then I will fight with you." Eric studied her for a long moment, and then, for the first time, he smiled. It was faint, but it carried the weight of hope. A hope buried for 100 years, now reborn. Together, they turned toward the broken tunnel. The surface waited above, a world that had forgotten his name. But the dawn was rising, and the whispers in Lena's mind were no longer cries for help. They were steady, strong, filled with purpose. As they climbed upward, the ruins behind them trembled. Stone cracked, dust fell, and faint red lights flickered once more. The Guardians might have fallen, but the prison still lived, and somewhere in the depths, other chambers still slept. Other soldiers still dreamed. The war was not finished. But for the first time in 100 years, a soldier of that war had walked free. When they reached the surface, the night sky stretched wide above. Stars glittered cold and bright. The battlefield lay quiet, its broken weapons and rusted armor glimmering in the starlight. To anyone else, it was only ruins, only death. But to Lena and Eric, it was the beginning of something greater. Eric lifted the helmet high, its glow catching the light of the stars. "This world forgot me," he said, his voice steady, but I will not let it forget what we fought for. Lena stood beside him, her notebook still in her hand. For the first time, she realized her notes were not for history. They were for the future. The whispers in her head grew softer, not cries, not commands, but a single, powerful truth. We survive. The battlefield was silent once more, but its silence was no longer the silence of death. It was the silence of waiting, waiting for the day when humanity would rise again, with its lost soldiers, with its forgotten heroes, with its unbroken spirit. And under the stars, a soldier and an archaeologist walked forward together, toward a future neither of them could yet see, but both of them were ready to face.